Lorenzo Carter, just different guys that we'll get into. But I'm curious. We kind of know where the strengths are. Maybe we can do that next week. But Garrett, when you look at the Falcons' current roster and rotation that they're looking at here going into 2023, what do you think is the biggest positional weakness on this team right now? Where do you think the position is?
I guess you could probably say linebacker, but I'm also expecting a pretty seismic leap from Troy Anderson in year 2. I think the Falcons are too. That just and you can see it just by evidence of a lot of their decisions that they made over the offseason. They didn't go re-sign like a Rashaan Evans or go get a big player or something like that. Somebody who can go in and be a cleanup guy. But I think he's on the roster, and that's Troy Anderson. I think he's going to have a big year this year. So it's more just lack of production and expectations and hopes more so than proven. Guys haven't proven it on the field. Like Arnold Ebiketie is like another one of those guys. They're expecting him to be like a 10-sack guy, but we haven't seen it, so we can't really expect it yet. Even though I definitely am. So it's just experience. I mean, like once they get like a lot of these younger guys up and running, I think they're going to be a better football team. But I think they've done a pretty good job at addressing a lot of their needs. It's just that they've got a lot of positionless football players, especially on offense. And it's hard to really look and point out one specific room, like on offense specifically, where you're weak, because all of these guys can play every position on the field, it seems like.
That's interesting. I was not expecting you to go linebacker. I wasn't expecting that. Max,
Me
do you go
neither.
linebacker as well, or where do you go?
To me, it's clearly edge. I guess that kind of folds into linebacker. There were two that came to mind. Edge is the first because I think it's the most pressing. I agree with you about Ebiketie and to a lesser extent D'Angelo Malone. But I forget who it was, but I saw someone sort of like rank out all of the edge rooms on Twitter, like rank out all the edge rooms in the NFL. And when you really compare what the Falcons have in that room, even with some projection, it's a bottom third NFL edge room pretty comfortably. I don't know that I'm not worried about it. I mean, worried is a word. Like, they've had the worst pass rush in the league for how long now? Like, anything is going to be an improvement, and I think they're going to generate a lot more pass rush from the interior, which will open up possibilities for the edge guys. But we're going on since John Abraham left that you're looking for a dominant edge guy, right? And it'll come at some point, but I don't think they're on the roster right now. The other one that came to mind, and I've been thinking about this a little more, and I think it's a much less pressing need, but the receiver room is not great.
Yeah.
I fully expect Drake London to be a number one wide receiver in the NFL probably as soon as this year. After that, you're looking at a lot of sort of like Mac Hollins, Scotty Miller. And I understand the reason I say it's a much less pressing need is like I understand that the counter to that is Kyle Pitts is going to split out wide a ton. Cordero Patterson is going to have reps everywhere on the field. Bijan Robinson will have reps in the slot. Like receiver, Jonnu Smith, they brought him in. He'll do all sorts of things. Receiver is a less important position in this offense than it is for a lot of offenses in the NFL. So I'm not as worried about it. But what made me think of that is like, if Drake London got hurt, God forbid, like, what is that room? What does that room become? And I think that is, those are the two I sort of flock to. Because I think you're right. They plugged a lot of holes this offseason. They really added a ton of bodies, especially on defense, where you would have said these are the clear weaknesses, but they had one of the worst rosters in the league last year. And I think that's important to admit, like, even where they made significant improvements, that it could be a below average unit in the league and still have improved. I don't know. Chase, what do you think?
I'm surprised neither of y'all said corner, because I think the corner room still stinks. And this is something that, like, AJ Terrell masks a lot of this, and it kind of builds off what they did this offseason, right? Where, to y'all's point about linebackers and edge, I'm not as worried about linebacker just because I think it's the least important position on defense. Generally speaking, you're going to only go two guys, and it's just, I don't know. We're mostly primarily in the nickel just era of the NFL, where it's just, you're going to have more secondary guys than linebackers. It's just usually how it's going to work on the field.
Yeah.
I would just look at kind of building off the issues with the pass rush. If the pass rush is bad again and Calais Campbell doesn't make a big jump, or it doesn't just keep his same production that he's had over almost 20 years in the NFL, if Bud Dupree doesn't have anything left in the tank, if Lorenzo Carter really gives you nothing on the outside, you could see how this gets ugly in a hurry. I mean, you need Taquan Graham to take the next step. That's a big one, and he showed flashes last year. But this secondary, specifically corner, I would feel a lot more comfortable with the gambles on the Mike Hughes and Jeff Okudahs if there was a strong pass rush. If you had guys that I was pretty certain would get home, that they would be a team that got after the quarterback at an elite rate, where it's like, yeah, I don't trust a lot of these guys in the back end, but they won't be asked to do as much. I think these guys are going to be asked to do a lot. AJ Terrell's been on an island and covers up a lot of weaknesses, but you're gambling on Jeff Okudah figuring it out, who has only been bad in the NFL. You're gambling on, guys like Trey Flowers working out here. Mike Hughes, who again has really only been bad in the NFL. So you have two really just guys who come into the starting spots in the secondary who have only been bad. And that's not to say they will not be bad, but when you're thinking at the offseason of like the hit rate for these kind of signings, it's pretty low, generally speaking. And if you get 1 to 2 to hit, then great. Then it worked out. You replace Casey Hayward, this, that, and the other. I just look at this where I'm like, this is pretty weak. And having to bring back Cornell Armstrong because you need bodies at corner, and he was just atrocious last year. Look, I love Jesse Bates and Richie Grant. I think they're going to be great at the safety spots. I just think corner's more valuable in this league. And I think the Falcons have really put a lot of faith in these 1-year gamble on these high upside younger corners who've never really shown it at the NFL level. So in a passing league with a team that is going to struggle to get home and cause problems for elite quarterbacks on their schedule, I just could see a scenario where this secondary gets torched more often than not. So that scares me.
I get that argument for sure. I think in sort of thinking about this in my head, the Falcons probably had one of the 2 or 3 worst defensive rosters in the league last year.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty much indisputable. You pick your spots where you can upgrade, and you pick a lot of spots, but you can't suddenly make every unit above average. Yeah. I think the corner room is probably a below average in the NFL room. But I to me, it like comes down to the big gamble in that room is Okudah. I don't think between Hughes and Clark Phillips and Darren Hall, like they're gonna get serviceable reps from nickel. The gamble is like Okudah needs to become an average, best case scenario, above average outside corner. And I think that's what they're really banking on in that corner room. But the safety room to me and the interior of the defensive line are like now 2 legitimately above average units in the NFL. I think Richie Grant and Jesse Bates is an above average NFL safety tandem. I think between Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata, Calais Campbell, Taquan Graham, if Eddie Goldman exists, that's like a legitimately deep and good interior, the likes of which we haven't seen in a while. And so you can only do so many things. I don't think there were very many good edges available this offseason at all. So I don't really fault anything they did there. The thing with corners is like they could have taken one at 8, right? I mean, if you're playing for need, that's a bigger need than running back in a million years. They didn't. They took Bijan and said we have to sort of have this conversation, and that's.
Do your Christian Gonzalez piece. I need a soundbite for this part. Your Christian Gonzalez piece.
I'm so excited to watch this offense. That I'm not even mad about betting on Okudah for a throwaway pick versus like the excitement we're going to see offensively. But when you're talking about value, like when you're talking about the Bijan pick in the context of value, this is the kind of thing you're talking about. That corner room is a question mark. I think there's a world in which it becomes like a really solid unit. I think there's also a world where, if you're talking injuries too, like if AJ Terrell went down, you're in a world of hurt. And that's where the depth isn't there yet.
I mean, if AJ Terrell goes down, I Teams may never run on the Falcons again. Like they're just only passing. Like you're going 40.
I mean, when we're talking about the most important players on the entire team this year, like he might be number one.
That's a good point.
Like guys you could least afford to lose, he might be the number one.
It's either him or like Jake Matthews.
Yeah, Jake Matthews would be a terrible loss. Just because you don't really have much of a swing tackle at that point. But no, I think the one thing that they have, we don't have a killer necessarily on defense outside of like maybe Grady Jarrett as far as like additions go, I should say. But like Arthur Smith said in like, he was on some podcast. I think it was like the Green Light podcast with Chris Long. He said effectively the one thing that they have this year that they haven't had in any past year, at least since he's been here, is depth. Like TQ, I love TQ. Taquan Graham. He's not a starting defensive tackle or defensive end. It's just, it shouldn't be a role that he's in, but that was a role that he was thrust into for multiple weeks out of the year. But if he's coming off of the bench, I think that's a splendid role for him where he continues to develop. And Eddie Goldman, like you mentioned, he's another one of those guys. I mean, I think this defense has a chance to be an above average group. I think a lot of that also has to do with a new defensive coordinator coming in. What is Ryan Nielsen going to look like? Like, what is his defense going to look like under Ryan Nielsen? Because we're losing a very good defensive coordinator in Dean Pease. I mean, for all of the lumps that he took with critics or whatever, he was a really good DC and he was a good play caller and he was able to adjust his defenses very effectively, especially considering the amount of talent that he had. Nielsen, of course, is a new guy and we'll see what happens. He's a first-time like sole play caller. He was a co-defensive coordinator over there in New Orleans. So I think that's a decent question mark to think about looking ahead to this season. But as far as corner goes, I think Clark Phillips too is going to be a stud. I think he's the steal of the draft, at least for the Falcons. And I'm really excited to see what he can do. I mean, if he's an inch or two taller, he's a first round pick. Like he could be going in the top 15, but he's not. And he'll be perfect in the nickel. And if they're in a pinch, I think they could stick him out wide. Dude was a Jim Thorpe finalist and he was a stud at Utah. He was really good. And I'm really excited to see what he can do for that room, especially if he's thrust into duty, which I expect he will at some point. Just because, like you said, like this unit is thin, but it's part of this team just not drafting well over the last 5 years or so, 6 years. It's what happens when you draft a group in 2017 and not a single one of those guys makes it to like year 4. It's embarrassing. So like this team was just gutted for talent, and it's something that you feel for multiple years down the road, and it's not something that's going to be fixed in one off season. But I will say Terry Fontenot did a fantastic job of finding bridge guys and continuing to find guys who fit the culture and everything else, according to all these quotes that are coming out from the team. He's done that. And I think that Arthur Smith has got his dudes. And I mean, Rome wasn't built in a day, so it wasn't going to be fixed overnight. But I think that this could be maybe in like that low 20s, early, like the low 20s, high teens, maybe as far as production goes, because on the flip side, you have a really, really potent rushing attack and they're going to hold the ball for long periods of time. And that's the best friend of a defense is a good offense that holds the football. And that's what the Falcons will do better than damn near anybody in the NFL next year.
If they're in the mid to high teens as a defense, you can start printing playoff tickets.
Yeah,
I think that's. I mean, if they're again
high end, though. That's really, really
right.
High
if they're
end.
a mid-20s defense, a low 20s defense, like I think that's what's going to hold them back. But like, I pretty much have no. It's going to be an above-average offense. I feel confident in saying that, even if Desmond Ridder is average, I think they're going to be an above-average offense, and so. Comes down to that. It comes down to not having key injuries. It comes down to like what is Ryan Nielsen as a coordinator, and how do these additions kind of work out. But I mean, we're talking about corner and edge. Like those are two of the premium positions in the NFL. Yeah. And if you're asking me what my main worry about this roster is, it's right there.
Can I put on my conspiracy?